everyone has preferences, okay? So my new person, I'm going to copy my preferences so that you have them. And I'm just copying the preferences so that our new person has them. So you're not doing any of this yet. Once you get to the advanced classes, we actually go through how to access other computers in the room, because sometimes people from this computer will want to use all those computers to render stuff on. If you had After Effects, you render on one station, everything's happy. In 3D, typically you render at multiple stations when you're doing big jobs, okay? There you go. Okay, so what we're going to do, and instead of me calling you new person, what's your name again?
Maureen.
Maureen? Thank you. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to go to the documents, and we're going to go to the Maya folder, and we're going to delete the 2015 folder that's there. You won't do that, Maureen. Okay, yours is already set. So we're going to delete the 2015 x64 folder. Okay? Every single time you come into this class and you're going to be working, you're going to be doing these steps. Okay? Once we start the first assignment, I'm going to stop reminding you to do that. You're just going to have to automatically do it. The bad thing is, if someone's rendering on the station, which, like I've said before, this could take like hours and days and sometimes weeks, you can't change the preferences, so you're just dealing with their preferences. Okay? But everyone should be pretty similar. All right, so we're going to leave that Maya window off to the side. Okay, we're going to open up a new Documents window. And we're going to open up our folder. And then inside of your, that's where I put it, inside of your folder here it says 2015 x64. Everyone found their 2015 x64? Okay, you're just going to right-click and copy it. And then you're going to right-click and paste it into the Maya one.
And one of these,
So make sure Maya is closed and then copy those over. A couple things that I want to point out that I saw that people were doing. One of them, as you're moving your stuff around, the scale tool is fine. It's the only tool that's fine to grab the center of it and scale up. Okay, because that scaling scales it uniformly. Okay, all three directions. If I have a person that's super tiny and I want to make them really big but not like stretched out, that's what I would do. Okay, and then I still have the ability to scale it individually to get the exact shape of what I want. So I'm trying to get that Lego shape. That's what I could do. When I switch to the Move tool, however, this guy has this little yellow box in the middle. Okay, yellow means that that's like highlighted, just like any other program. If I click on the green, right now it's green, you'll see that green becomes highlighted because now that one is selected. If I click on red, if I click on blue, all of those will turn yellow because that's what's highlighted. When you move something like this using that center box, this is what's going to happen. I have this thing right now, it's at the center of my screen. As I move it, you'll see that now it's like floating above the air, okay? Because it moves it perpendicular to what we're looking at, or however you want to look at it, okay? It's moving it along whatever direction the camera's pointing, okay? It works great if I'm in a perfectly side view, or a perfect top, or a perfect front, but I don't want to move this ever, ever, ever in the perspective view using that middle box, okay? Stuff just doesn't get aligned. When we talk about the three axes over here, keeping things perfectly lined up, that's what we're talking about, okay? The same thing with the rotate tool. I could grab the middle of this and rotate objects, but it doesn't give me clean rotations, okay? No object is just like randomly rotated at some crazy angle, okay? Things are rotated typically at intervals. Have a 360-degree circle, usually at some sort of increment of that. It might be like 10 degrees. So I would take this and I would say, okay, well, as I rotate this one thing, this is changing. So I'm going to change this to negative 10 degrees. And that way I get this thing at a perfect 10-degree angle. Okay? It's not like that, even though that looks close. When we start adding stuff into the scene, because that's kind of effed up, the rest of the scene can be effed up because we're trying to make things fit together. Okay? Think of a wall. How many people have crown molding or have seen crown molding before? Okay? Just a couple? Fancy?
Yeah.
Okay. Crown molding is super precise. There's a lot of work that goes into putting a piece of crown molding into your house. Same thing happens here. Okay? We want to keep as much accuracy as we can. In some areas, we're not going to. In some areas, we will kind of wiggle outside that box, but for the most part, we want to keep everything precise. So even though we're not at the stage, or we're ever going to be at the stage of needing to look exactly at these numbers and starting to type stuff in, sometimes we do want to do that. If I have this cube here and I want to sit that cube right on top of the ground, what I do mentally is I take this translate Y and I put it up here, and if it doesn't work, which obviously it went too high, I cut that number in half. So half of 1.888 is 0.944. 944. Okay? Cut 18 in half, cut 8 and 8 in half. So that gives me that number. Now, I don't, for a Lego, who cares? I'll set this to 2, and I'll set that to 1. I'm happy with that. Okay? So some things that we do type in just to get that accuracy. Rotation is especially one that we would type in. If I had this Lego block and I wanted one seated right after it, I may round my numbers just so it's easier to do the math to figure out if I duplicate this and I scoot it over here, putting that to 5 would get those two objects butt to butt, okay, or butt to head, whatever you want to call it. All right, so now they're touching each other, they're right lined up, and I would duplicate it again, and I would just set that one to 10, and now that's perfectly lined up, okay? So some objects we want to type things in, we'll get more of those as we go. You'll really find out that, you know, it really helps just to be like that kind of anal about doing that kind of stuff. The other thing, and this is going to be a common thing that just happens, it's very easy to get yourself lost inside Maya just by doing something like, there we go, like that. Here we go. Like that. So right now, if I went and I grabbed this and I went to move it, it moves that object. But this guy is, you know, he's highlighted too, so I move him. But I can't grab both of these objects at the same time. Well, one of the modes that we get into inside Maya is component mode. Okay? Component mode is being able to edit individual pieces of that object. Think of the pen tool. You can grab the whole path and move it, or we can grab an individual point on that path and move that point. The more points we have, the finer that shape detail we can get. The same thing is inside here. Okay? But Maya has a name for it. It's called component mode, where I'm physically in a mode of selecting just these types of things. You'll notice too, I was in component mode, I moved my objects, but if you look over here, I'll grab the cube, you'll see that my translate X and translate Z have no change to them. My translate X, which was 0 before, I moved it, it's still 0. Well, it remembers everything about the object. It remembered that my 3 axes that I have here are for the object itself. The individual components, if I right-click and go to vertices and grab these, and I click here, you'll see that the individual components themselves also have information stored about them. So every single point, I could literally go in there and move each point and see where that point is in the world. And if I wanted to reset this, I could just go here and reset it and bring it back to where it originally was. Oops. One of our assignments in animation class was to animate a face. And if you're animating a face, what we have to do is that we would take this one head that looks like the head we want, and we duplicate it, and we duplicate it, and we duplicate it, and we change each one of those faces to give a different emotion, okay? So it looks like, that's not it, blend shapes. They're called blend shapes. And it looks like your screen is like this. Okay? That's what your scene is, where you have all these different poses. I want a pose where the eyebrow is raised, the right eyebrow, the left eyebrow. I want a smirk, I want a smile, I want a frown, I want the mouth open. I create poses for each pose that I want my character to be able to do. Okay? I don't just create a character and all this stuff just works. So some people, when they move the character head originally, instead of moving the object, they actually move the individual points. So what would happen is, every time they went into a smile, that head would zoom back and then smile, and then it would zoom back over. Okay? So you just have to be aware of that kind of stuff as you're moving stuff around. Okay? So typically, if we're moving an object, I physically want to move this object, I make sure that I'm in object mode. Now, how can I tell if I'm in object mode or component mode? Any guesses? I'll put the color. There we go. Perfect. This one, if you look at the color, is green. This one, if you look at the lines, they're blue. Okay? It's a subtle change, but just by acknowledging it's blue, I'm in component mode, I got to do something to get out of it. Okay? And you also see that there's points over here which are now purple. If I highlight them, they're now yellow. But acknowledging that. So that way you can say, okay, I want to be in green mode to move this object. I don't want to be in blue mode. Yes, blue mode works. I can grab it. I can move it. But I could also accidentally not grab everything and not enough of the object and do that to it, where I'm grabbing it and distorting what the object looks like. Okay? So I always want to make sure that I'm in object mode when I'm moving objects around. Now, it doesn't matter what object you do this to, but click on one of your objects, and then I want you to hold the right mouse button down. Okay? Just keep your mouse there. Hold that right mouse button down. What you're going to see is what's called a marking menu. And this is one of the fun things about Maya, is that we can actually customize all of these marking menus and make our own marking menus. The same way we added some shelf items, we could create a menu that has all of our stuff in it. Okay? But it also allows us the ability to go to different components of that object. So if I go in here, I can see there's a vertex, there's vertex face, there's face, multi, UV, object, oops. And there's menus inside menus. And then if I look down, here's a whole bunch of other stuff that I can do to that object. Okay? This is one way to get to object and component mode. Now, that gets complex when we talk about this, because not only is there component mode, but there's individual component mode, and then there's like global component mode, where we're editing components for multiple objects at the same time. Okay? This right one, anytime we do a right click, that's for whatever we have selected or whatever the mouse is on. If I right click and I go to vertex on this object, it makes this object go into vertex mode. If I right click and my mouse is on this object and I go to vertex, it puts that other one in vertex mode. Okay? So we just have to be aware of it. Okay? Just being aware of what we're on and what we're selecting. Now, there's a hotkey for going back and forth, and it's typically best to use the hotkey. The hotkey is F8. So you might want to write that down on your sheet. Somewhere on there I have it. Yeah, in the miscellaneous near the bottom, it says object/component. F8, not F and 8, but the function 8 key, will take you into component mode and then get you out of component mode and back to object mode. Okay? So if I'm in here and I need to edit this object's components, I can right click and go to it. The best thing to do, though, is to hit F8. Okay? F8 will take you into the mode and allow you to grab the components. Now, it puts me in there, but it doesn't allow me to see all the components or edit all the components right away. On yours, too, I believe, you have a little arrow right here next to this thing called component type. Okay? Right under your assets. So click that little arrow. See that little arrow right there? And that's going to open up what's called the selection mask. Does everyone have their selection mask up? So up here, these boxes that popped up, these are all the new things. So right now it's on vertex mode. Vertex and Maya are the points. Okay? we're going to be doing definitions too. So if you want to turn your sheet over and start writing down some definitions that we're going to be doing. So a vertex is just a single polygon point, okay? And that allows us to grab the individual piece and move that individual piece around. So if we're in there and if we're in the blue mode, the component mode, we're clicked on vertex, you should see your object turn blue with all these little purpley things around it. Okay? So click on one of those little purpley things and move it around. All right, now this other one, the one next to it, is points. So we click on that one, click the other one off. Whenever you click one on, click the other one off. The next one is points. If you look at these ones, they're not purple, now they're brown. And grab one of these and move it over. So we clicked off edges, clicked on the next one. You'll see that these ones allow us to grab what's called the face. And the face is the area between 3 or more vertices of a polygon. Okay, so now there's other marking menus up here. These other ones aren't going to do anything. We have other stuff over here, but it's nothing that we're going to need to worry about right now. Okay, if you right-click on any one of these, you'll see that it actually lists. You don't have to remember it. It lists what each one is. Okay, and each one of these items is very specific to the kind of surface that we're dealing with. Right now we're dealing with what's called a polygon. Okay, there are NURB surfaces, there are lattices, there are particles, and we could use this to select those different components. Okay, we also have things like the rotation axes. We have things like image planes. We have selection handles. We have scale pivots, joint pivots. Okay, lots of different things there. All right, so let's hit F8. Okay, that gets us back into the green mode, and then green mode is object mode. Okay, now I'm going to show you, I need to delete that. Here's a polygon sphere. This has a lot of divisions to it. Okay, I have on my screen, I have on the left side this little counter over here, and this counts vertices, edges, faces, triangles, and UVs. Why would I care about how many polygons I have over here? Any guesses? Render time is 1. Where else might they care about polygon count? Video games. Video games have a limit. Okay, when they're making a character for a video game, it's a little bit lax now because systems are so much more powerful. But when they came out with like the first video game, they're like, okay, we have 100 polygons we can use to create this character. And that's all they had. For each character, they could only literally create that character with 100 polygons. This is a cool game. This was like the very first game that used polygons. And it's called Virtua Fighter. You can see, there's a better picture. You can see how blocky this character is. Okay? That's what video games used to look like when they went from what's called sprite-based games, where they use basically pictures, to actually creating 3D pieces of geometry that would then interact with each other. Okay, this is, I'll just show Mario. Super Mario Brothers. That should pull up the first one. There it is. Okay, so this one here, all this guy is pictures. This picture of Mario is him at different poses. So there's one of him like this, and one of him like this, and one of him like that. And they just loop this thing as he's running, and they have different colors that they can apply to it. All these little guys here are little pictures with little animations done to them. All of these guys here are pictures with little animations done to them. All of this stuff, before they had polygons, was how they created video games. And it was basically, if this guy is going to throw a fireball, they would then load in those pictures of what the fireball would look like, and they would jump to that animation sequence. If he's going to do whatever, they would jump to that sequence. With Virtua Fighter, they actually had moving pieces of geometry. They weren't switching between things. It was literally, let's build a person and put a bone system inside there so they can move around, and then we can get them to actually interact with each other. Okay? But they were really worried about polygon count, because if the computers couldn't handle it, then it wouldn't work. These computers are pretty good. Once you get into a certain number of polygons, it gets super duper slow. I think my Lego, if you remember from last time, was 150 megabytes or so, which is it's a big scene. All right? So every time we work on stuff, we try to keep still the polygon count as low as possible because of, right now, our render times. Okay? If we're dealing with 3 billion polygons, some of these stations probably wouldn't even run it. Okay? They wouldn't even render. Typically, you're in, for this class, you're not going to hit the millions, but typically, for a good scene, you're probably about the millions. For a Hollywood scene, you're in like the trillions. Okay? Where they're literally, they break things apart because it just won't render. When they do Shrek's in one scene, Donkey's in another scene, and then eventually in post, they put those two things together, just because those scenes are so heavy. If we looked at the Hulk ILM model. If we look at this model here of the Hulk, and we look at some of that detail that's on him, you can see all of these little pits and dots. That's all geometry. Those are all little things that have been adjusted. Okay? For every wrinkle, there's an edge that's going along there. For every, like I said, every little pock mark on him, there's a little vertice that's just poked in. Okay? And so it's a lot of information. Let me see if I can pull up the wireframe. Yeah, they don't have the one from the movie. If you remember the ILM video that I showed last time, there was a fight scene where Hulk and Thor and someone else are fighting on top of this big thing, and all you see is green. You just see this big green mass coming down because that's the Hulk. He's so defined, so much information inside of him that it's just like a big green mesh of wireframe, a big green mesh of vertices and all this stuff. Okay? So typically, like I said, we try to keep our polygon count as low as possible. So for this, let's say we started off with a sphere, and I wanted that sphere to have less divisions right off the bat because I don't need that many divisions. That's where I can come over here to where it says inputs. Okay? So delete your stuff that you have there. You're going to have to switch to object mode and then delete it, and then create a sphere, a polygon sphere. All right, so with this polygon sphere, I want less division. So what I'm going to do is I click on it, and then off to the right, you see where it says Inputs Polysphere. Click on the word Polysphere 1. Okay, this brings up the history of how that sphere was created. If you look at the board where we have the word history, you'll see that this is one of those important things that's going to, could be an issue for us. Options for what we can edit. So if we wanted to take this subdivision axes and turn that down, we could just click in there and type in 10 if we wanted to. And you see that the divisions going around the sphere are now less. If we go to the height and put that at 10, you'll see that we get less divisions there as well. Okay? Now what I want you to do is I want you to click on the word so that it's blue. Okay? Then you're going to move your mouse out to this area, and holding down the scroll wheel, you're going to drag left and right. Okay? So as long as that word is blue, hold down the mouse with the left mouse button, or the middle mouse button, scroll wheel, and drag left and right. Just by creating this little dimple inside here, this little opening, my inputs list has inflated a whole lot. Okay? If you look, I did an extrude, and I tweaked that extrude. Then I did a couple more extrudes. Then I tweaked that. Then I extruded again. And then I deleted a component. So Maya's remembering all the stuff that I'm doing to this object because at some point I may need to go back and tweak it. If I said to myself, I need this shape to be different, I can go back to this original extrude and I can still edit that original extrude. Okay? And then all my other changes will propagate and follow that. All right? So it's kind of like if you model an arm and you're like, oh, the arm's too big. You can go back to that first thing you did and extrude it, and it'll go further. Or you can tweak it and it'll adjust everything. Okay? So it can be helpful, but it can also cause trouble. Now here's where it can cause trouble, is that if I started doing stuff like adding extra divisions in here, you can see my nice little shape that I had got really distorted just by adding an extra division. Okay? So I have to be careful. And sometimes we don't want all that history in there. If you look at a character, or if you come into the advanced classes and you look at some of the students' scenes that don't manage their history, these things will go on forever. That's like they have a whole character built, and you can go down to where they started off with a cube, okay? Because literally every single thing that they've ever done to this is saved in that, okay? Now this is not like an undo type thing where we can go in here and just start undoing these individual components. These are individual object type things that we can go back and tweak to a point. If I had a list and it went all the way down to the first cube and I built a person, I couldn't go back to that cube and start adding divisions to it. It'll just freak it out and it'll explode. So typically we want to get rid of this. So in our shelf, we didn't create shelves last time, did we? No, okay. In our shelf, we're going to create some tools that are going to help us manage our history here. Okay. So sometimes we're going to do what's called deleting the history. So in this case, I'm going to delete it, and you'll see that all that history goes away, and now my shape is kind of locked in there. Now this is also important if you're going back and forth between different versions. If you work here at 2015 and you go home when you're working in 2014 and you come back and forth, something in 2015 might not be in there in 2014. Okay? Just be aware of it. All right, so that's what the history is and where it can kind of get us into trouble, but also where it can help us model our stuff. Okay? Help us get it down to what we need to tweak in this kind of thing. All right? But like I said, any of these things here, just by clicking on that, I can scale that object up in that area, or I can rotate just in that one direction with that virtual slider. Okay, so definitely use those as often as you can. All right. And I'm going to undo all the way back to that. Perfect. Okay. All right, so now we have this. So now we have our sphere, and what I want to do, let me get back to where we're just whatever. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to take this sphere, I'm going to duplicate it. Okay, so click on your sphere and duplicate, and drag the blue arrow out. Okay, so basically our sphere is just duplicated and moved off to the side. You may have to again click on the move tool or hit W so you can get to the move tool and move it out. You may also have to hit F8 if you're in component mode, so make sure you're in the green mode. We're going to duplicate this sphere and drag it over in the red really close to it, and then scale it down. Okay, so what we're going to do, we all have 3 spheres, correct? Correct. All right. So what we're going to do is we're going to group these things a certain way. Okay. Now, thinking about this before we get into it, if this is a solar system, even though it's a mini one, we have a moon, a planet, and a sun. Okay. So how does the moon move?
Around the planet.
Around the planet. Okay. And does the moon also spin by itself? Yes. I didn't know that either. A couple years ago I figured that out. So the moon itself is going to spin around like this, and this planet is going to spin around, but the moon is also going to go around this thing like that. Okay? So what I want to do is control that movement. Okay? So the first thing we're going to do is grab the moon, and so we don't get confused, let's name the moon. So your little sphere, just come over here to our channel box and call it moon. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to animate this moon. So if we look in the timeline, this little timeline at the bottom, you'll see that there is on mine, I have a little ticker here that's at 1. Everyone's, I'm assuming, is at 1 unless you messed it up. Is everyone's at 1? Good. Okay, so we're going to click on the rotate Y, because that rotate Y is how we spin around this way. Okay, I'm going to right click on the word rotate Y and go to key selected. Okay, so I'm setting a keyframe for that one object. Maya is not like After Effects in the fact that if we set one key, everything else is automatic. Okay, we have to set keys every time we want to animate something changing. So we're going to change our time to 120. So we just click on our timeline to 120. Okay, and how many times do you think that the moon would rotate around itself, just revolving around itself? Or rotating? Any number. 25 rotations? Okay. So 25 times 360. 9,000? Is that right? 25 times 360. 9,000. Look at that. All right. So what we're going to do is our first keyframe was at frame 1 at 0. Our new keyframe is going to be at 120. So we clicked on 120. This guy over here says 120. Then we're going to change our rotate Y to 9,000. And then right click on rotate Y and key selected. Okay, so we have this little guy spinning around. Wonderful. Okay. Now a couple of you may have noticed that as you're typing your stuff in here, if I just type it in, sometimes when I right click and set a key, it doesn't actually set a key for that because I never hit enter when I typed it in. Okay? So just one of the little Maya fun things is that when you're doing stuff, anytime you type in a number, always hit enter. Okay? And there's a difference between enter and return. Well, let's enter on this keyboard too. This enter key over here on the keyboard, typically we don't use. Use this one over here that's on the numeric keypad. Okay? That one like accepts it and gets you out of the box. This other one accepts it and keeps you in the box. For instance, I want this to be 40, so I type in 40 and hit this enter. Oops. Sorry, backwards. This one gets you out of it. This one keeps you in it. Okay, so just be aware of that. So if I type in 50 and hit enter on the numeric keypad, it's still here. But if I type in 50 and hit the other enter, I've accepted it, and now I could type something else if I wanted. All right, so that's part 1. So part 1 is this guy spins around. All right, so now we need to animate the Earth spinning around too. So we're going to click on the Earth, planet, whatever it is. We're going to name that planet. So just name it planet or Earth or whatever you want to call it. And we're going to do the same exact thing. Let's not have it spin around 9,000 degrees though this time. Okay? So first thing we need to do before we set any keys is go back to frame 1. Frame 1 is where our animation starts. So we click on frame 1. This guy on the far right by our controls says 1, so we know we're on frame 1. We right click on the word rotate Y and we key select it. Then we go up to frame 120 and we spin around. Pick a number. What? Once? Okay, so once would be 360. We'll actually be able to see this one. And then right click on rotate Y again and key select it. So now we're going to link them together. Okay? Before we do that, I want you to go to Window, Outliner. Because I want you to see the magic happen before it happens, or as it's happening. Okay? In the outliner, this is a list of all of our objects in the scene. Okay? So you'll see the top 4 objects, perspective, top, front, and side. Those are your cameras. We can't change those or delete those. Those just stay there all the time. Our next one, in my case, I have perspective 1. I'm not sure where that came from. I can delete that one. That's not a big issue. I'm deleting it because it shouldn't be there. Okay, then we have P-sphere 1, we have planet, and we have moon. So what I want to do is I want my moon to now move with my planet. Okay? So I'm going to take my moon, and I'm going to middle mouse button, pick it up. You can see my little thing right there. And if you hold it over the planet and let go, it'll put it inside that planet new group parenting type thing. Okay? So once I do that, that's it. What was that?
Can you do that again?
Yes, I can. So if I middle mouse button, hold on moon until I get this little plus sign, drag it on top of planet, and let go, it puts it inside the planet's object structure or whatever.
But
Okay?
they have to be on top of each other to do that.
No, they can be anywhere on the list. If I have 7,000 objects, I can drag the bottom one to the top one or whatever. Okay? All that matters is I put it inside there, so now I have a little plus sign next to planet, and there's a little arrow showing there's the moon. There's actually, client's not responding. All right, yours is going to go away. Maybe? Yep, see. So now you have to watch up here. Like I said, it happens sometimes. There are some planets that actually have like 12, 13 moons, so it's going to be obviously a task to do that. So what we have to do now is we have to get the planet to now revolve around the sun. Now I don't want the planet's rotation to be the same kind of thing where we just parent it and as the sun's rotating, the planet is rotating like that. Okay? What I want to happen is the planet just kind of moving on its own. If I had the entire solar system, Mercury moves at a different speed around the sun, then does the next planet, then does the next planet. Okay? So I essentially want to have a different planet or a different rotation speed for this than I do that. Just so you can see what I'm going to do, or what I'm not going to do. I'm just going to set a couple keys and then we'll set this in a minute. So let's just say this is 720. Key that. All right, so now my sun is rotating. I'm not going to do what we just did, which was just drop it on here and just have this thing spin perfectly around it. Okay? You can see it's matching. As the sun is spinning, that other planet is spinning too. We don't want that. There we go. So what we want to do is we're going to take the planet here, and we're going to hold down the control key and hit G. And that's another hotkey for you. Okay? Now this is grouping. Grouping is a lot like parenting, except it creates a brand new blank object for stuff to get grouped into. If you had After Effects, it's kind of like a null. Okay? That's what a group essentially is. You'll notice that when you hit Control G, our pivot is now at the origin. It's back to at the center of our scene. Okay? So that's exactly where I want it because that's where the sun is. And so now this thing I could spin around at whatever speed and not affect that sun thing. Okay? So everyone has their planet grouped? Yes? Okay.
It's parented.
We could actually go in here, have nothing selected, and just fill this entire thing up with groups. Okay? And this is just nothing. This is just groups. Okay? Also, if I have the other stuff selected here, like if I open this up and I click on the moon, that's weird that my screen is still shared on some people, but not others. Does everyone still have my screen shared? Okay. If I click on the bottom object, you'll see that my planet and my group 1 are not the same color blue. You'll see that there's a different shade there. That's indicating that I have something inside that hierarchy selected. The brightest blue object is what I have selected. So if I collapse this, you'll see that it still maintains that darker blue color. I don't have the group selected. I have an object inside the group selected. It's not until I click on the group, it becomes that bright blue that we see that that object actually is selected. Again, all little intricate things that you're going to have to pay attention to that'll just make your job easier. Okay? So make sure you're clicked on group 1, that it's that bright blue color, and then we're going to animate this. So again, we go back to frame 1, set a key for rotate Y. We go up to 120. Let's set it for 720. And keyframe it again. And then when we hit play, we should see something along those lines. Okay, so now we're going to do the last stage, which is just make the sun rotate as well. Okay, so just keyframe the sun. Keyframing is essentially, if you talk it over in your head, it's a lot easier than a lot of people make it. Turn that down. All right. So there's our planets and there's our revolving stuff. You'll see that we used a mix of grouping and parenting. Okay. Inside of our outliner, if we look at this, the moon is parented to the planet. Okay. That's called parenting when we take one object and we have another object being its parent. Just like you're driving in your car, your parents are driving and the kids are following along. The group is when we take an object and we group it into a blank object. They are essentially the same thing. With a group, we get that white node that says group that we can rename to be whatever. With parenting, we're typically adding it to an already existing object. Okay? So if I had all of this stuff that's here, and I said this animation is wonderful, but it's too small, I could take those two objects and group those together and call this solar system, let's say. And then I could scale this entire thing up. And everything's going to work. Okay, my entire animation is still working because individually these objects know where their pivots are, they know where they're moving, they know how they're rotating. That's not changing. Because I've grouped them together, it maintains all that stuff. I can still go down into these other leaf levels and grab the moon, and I could still take the moon and change its rotation Y. I could change its scale. Changing its position, I could also do that if I needed it to be, let's say, further out. I just have to be careful that I don't hit the sun when I do that. Okay, so I can still edit all of this stuff, and it's a lot of this like leaf editing stuff where we're not editing the main tree part, we're editing all these little sub features of it. Okay, and this is animation, which is typically it's a lot more complex than when we do modeling stuff. When you do modeling, it's typically like I want the arm to be all grouped together, so I group the arm. But then I may go and group the fingers individually, so those are nice and organized. And I may group, if I have legs, the pants and the belt and the feet and all these little individual things. Okay, so this is our way of organizing it, but pay attention to the fact that it's not like Photoshop, it's not like Illustrator, it's not like InDesign, in the fact that these things are grouped, but we can edit them individually. And if I wanted to then scale this whole thing up, I can't click on any one of these pieces or marquee all of these pieces and start scaling them, because it does that, where it's scaling them individually. I have to make sure I grab that group, that solar system group, and scale that group, or rotate that group, or move that group. Yes, ma'am.
So how do you move just the planet without moving anything with the moon?
I would have to make sure I go in. Well, that's a good question. We can't do that. Okay. There are some ways to kind of get around it, but it's actually, let me see if it'll work. Down arrow. Yeah. To there. No, it's not going to work. If I wanted to move the planet without it, let me reset these so they're back to where they were. It's typically easiest to do it when they're at their initial state. Is I would take the moon. What was that?
What about just scaling then, if we can't like move it separate?
Right. I would unparent the moon,
Okay.
scale it. I'll just say it's that big now, and then reparent it back in there. And then everything updates as long as it's back in that structure. Okay. If you have one character and he's doing this awesome animation, but you realize, oh, I missed something, you could unparent the pieces, do the work to it, and then reparent it, and all that information goes along with it too. Okay. So it can be very helpful. But just pay attention to those factors, as well as paying attention to some of the history stuff we'll get more and more into. When we come in next class, we're going to start doing a project. You're going to take it right from the start of it, creating the pieces, animating the pieces, modeling the pieces, rendering, texturing, lighting, all the way to the end of putting it into a final movie. Okay? So probably not by the end of next class, but by the end of next week, you'll have a movie from start to finish you've created of something very stupid that you're not going to want to show anyone because you're so embarrassed of how ridiculous it is and how long it took you to make. Okay, so that's what we're going to do next week. You can save your work if you want to. It doesn't matter. I'm not going to save mine. I'm just going to exit it. Actually, I'm going to save it because I have a phobia. Solar system. There we go. You don't have to save it. No, we're not going to do anything else with this. In 5 years, I'll look at this and say, why did I save it? And then I'll be done. The only thing I want to do, did we do any preferences? No, we didn't change any preferences, but we'll still back up the preferences just so we get in the habit of doing it. So save or don't save, but close Maya down. And we're going to back up our preferences. Okay, so we're going to go to the D drive. We're going to go to the Maya folder, and we're going to right click on that 2015 folder, and we're going to cut it. Okay, we could copy it and paste it. We want to cut it so that no one accidentally takes our stuff or drops our stuff into whatever. Okay, so we're right clicking on the 2015, we're cutting it, and then we're going to go into our folder on the D drive, and we're going to paste it right in there. It'll say, do you want to overwrite? I'm just going to say yes. Do this for all conflicts, move and replace. And it says it's using something. I'll just skip that folder. Okay, so I have my preferences backed up. When we come in next time, we're going to go through, put our preferences back in, add some more stuff to our preferences that we're going to use, and then create our scene. And then when we're done, we'll copy our preferences back. Every day, get in the habit of copying your preferences back and forth. That way you have them. I mentioned it last time. You should have a backup of your stuff or getting your backup system kind of in place. If you have a thumb drive, copy your folder onto your thumb drive. If you have a Dropbox, drop it onto Dropbox. Okay? All right. So that's it.